For certain gaming franchises, it takes a while before they garner any type of worldwide recognition or respect, if said series gains that notoriety at all. Grand Theft Auto, Yakuza, Metal Gear Solid, these game franchises all had slow starts associated with a lacking in growth in regards to their fan bases until each ended up releasing an iteration that opened the eyes of the masses. Persona was no different. Though its fourth numbered installment was heralded as one of the best RPGs of its generation, the release of Persona 4 and its golden version fell on mostly deaf ears thanks to the consoles they were associated with and the timing of said releases. Then Persona 5 arrived in 2017, and safe to say, Persona Mania began to run wild, raking in awards, critically high scores, and fans in droves. Persona 5 turned the niche JRPG into a household name amongst gamers, casual and hardcore alike. With the popularity of Persona 5 came the releases of its Royal version, a spin-off based around dancing, and now a Musou-centric experience handled by the same studio that brought gamers Dynasty Warriors. Though I didn't dance the night away with Persona 5's first spin-off, I was incredibly excited about this promoted sequel to one of the greatest experiences from gaming's 8th generation, while embracing a combat system I've become accustomed to since the first Dynasty Warriors game was released in North America. Like its predecessor, it's pretty much impossible to complete everything in a first playthrough of Strikers, mostly thanks to the necessity of crafting every playable Persona summon. One can only be crafted in New Game Plus. Thankfully, a majority of the game's trophy list is pretty straightforward, including learning every character's 4 special combat combo abilities known as Master Arts, by completing battles while using said arts without really paying attention. After a little over 50 hours, I finished the main story on normal difficulty alongside all the special requests, including the post-narrative side missions where the player must conquer greatly powered versions of certain bosses, including the final antagonist. What came next was the game's biggest detriment in terms of completion: maxing out all the bond skills. The newly implemented bond system is responsible for improving attributes and abilities across all the playable characters, such as increased health, better chances for attaining persona after defeating enemies, and even making the bond meter rise faster, the latter doing little to nothing by the time the true grind begins. To fully complete the game's bond skill tree, the player is forced to either grind certain side missions, play through the game several times, or do both while tackling the game's merciless difficulty. After attempting to gain bond points through one repeatable side mission, I took to crafting the best group of persona possible before loading up my mastered save to start a New Game Plus on merciless difficulty. Thankfully, my level 99 characters and persona were able to make it to the first dire shadow enemy, dungeon-specific adversaries that hit harder and have more health than most enemies in the game, including story bosses. I spent the next 6 hours defeating it, leaving the area and coming back to overcome it again, until I reached bond level 99, after starting the merciless grind at bond level 70, and finished the skill list for the platinum trophy at the 65-hour mark. Set 5 months after the events of Persona 5, the player-named protagonist returns to Tokyo to reunite with his fellow Heartstealers, the Phantom Thieves. The group's intended road trip across Japan is both interrupted and benefited by a sudden return to the metaverse, another realm where the twisted and warped desires of humans manifest themselves into corrupt, deadly beings only those pure of heart can defeat. The Phantom Thieves are graced with the presence of a sentient AI named Sophia that proves to be the digital manifestation of a new app known as Emma. Sophia becomes a member of the Phantom Thieves in their quest to discover why the metaverse is back in existence. Like many a Persona story before it, Strikers does a great job walking that fine line of being overly dramatic, focusing on friendship, love, and the pursuit of happiness, while showcasing the nature of humans that can be corrupted if they're not careful. Considering Strikers isn't meant to be as hefty a story as its numbered counterparts, a lot of the main villains come and go as per the Persona norm, while not overstaying their welcome. Unfortunately for players coming into Strikers without playing the original Persona 5, they will miss out on some key character moments, interactions, and dialogue, as Strikers embraces its nature as a narrative sequel. Though Strikers also represents a genre change, a lot of what made 5's traditional turn-based RPG combat style so enjoyable remains here, being more like a Kingdom Hearts action RPG experience instead of a full-blown Dynasty Warriors clone. The stereotypical Musou action does exist, with a copious amount of enemies flooding the screen for the player to hack and slash through them with one of the 4 playable thieves at a time, with the player being able to switch between each character at almost any given moment. The button mashing that comes from hitting the pair of strike buttons, the standard attack or special attack, in certain sequences could have been just as repetitive here as with any other Musou experience, but thanks to the aforementioned Master Arts system, every character has a different style of play. For example, Ryuji can unleash a charged up batter-like swing after holding down and releasing the special attack button following a 3-hit standard attack. Morgana can turn into a van and creates an inferno, and Yusuke will slice through enemies with ease thanks to the simplistic combo system. Returning from Persona 5 and its predecessors is the enemy weakness system that is usually based on one of the many elemental properties each character represents, or in the case of protagonist Joker, a variety of said elementals depending on the persona in his repertoire. By holding down the summon button, the player will pause a fight while choosing the best course of action in regards to what spells should be utilized. Landing successful attacks on enemy weak points will stun them, or in the case of tougher enemies, chip away at their armor before being stunned, leaving them open for an all-out attack where the 4 characters team up to unleash a devastating series of strikes, topped off by one massive explosion, the perfect way to end a fight if the player can time it properly. While all-out attacks are solely dependent on weakening an enemy, the new Showtime maneuver can be activated against any enemy at any time once the Showtime bar fills up, after a character lands enough strikes on the adversaries. Each active member of the team can fill up their Showtime gauge and activate it before the battles end if the opportunity arises, giving players the chance to stack Showtime attacks during those more difficult exchanges. Switching between characters, known as baton pass just like in Persona 5, will increase the speed of filling up the Showtime gauge. 2 returning from the original Persona 5 are guns, that also pause the action to sternly aim for potential winging of flying enemies, or doing no damage on someone strong against being shot. The Velvet Room where players can mix, match, and even power up Persona is back, with a more simplified system and less monsters. Using Persona points gained by winning battles, deleting currently held Persona, or making Persona in the Velvet Room, players can use said points to level up their actively held Persona, to make Joker's physical and magical attacks stronger, increase the chance of landing a critical strike, or enduring more damage than the player can dish out during a rather crowded scenario. Though some Persona can't be crafted unless Joker and or the base Persona is at a certain level, a little planning and grinding will most likely solve any Persona crafting hangup. The dungeons, known as jails in this iteration, are both impressive and uninspired. With this being a Musou game, Strikers has a lot of open areas, with some arenas having environmental and interactable elements, like a traffic light to swing on, or blowing up a car for widespread fire damage. One issue with interactable objects is the fact that utilizing said items is connected to the same button as the all-out attacks, meaning the player may be going for an all-out attack and the game decides to have Joker jump onto a nearby lamppost instead. Beyond the initial presentation of each jail, very few feel remarkable as the player progresses, mostly because of backtracking and the general stilted nature of enemy positioning for ambush attacks. But there are some major stipulations attached to each jail, including the security system where if an enemy or spotlight sees the character, the alert meter will rise, locking treasure chests, and even kicking the player out of the currently occupied jail if the meter reaches 100%. One of the biggest differences between Strikers and Persona 5 is the fact the player can't exit a dungeon at any time, so the player can leave a jail from one of the numerous checkpoints scattered around a dungeon, have their health and stamina points, the game's equivalent of magic points or MP, automatically restored, and return to where the player left off without a care. The aforementioned bond system that allows for the game's skill tree to exist isn't the only new out-of-combat gameplay addition. Players can purchase both recipes and food items to cook when inside the RV or Phantom Mobile. Cooked items produce bond points when cooked for the first time, and can be great restorative or buff items during battle and outside of combat. Toned down, however, are the various HUDs the player will walk and run through while progressing the story. While each new town looks magnificent and different compared to the one before it and after it, there is nothing to do in any of them outside of buying merchandise and once in a while completing an investigation by talking to a few NPCs to advance the narrative. The areas and cities of Persona 5 felt alive with so many distractions that usually helped emphasize the wonderful confidant system. The confidant system also doesn't exist in Strikers, with a lot of the memorable characters from Persona 5 conveniently on vacation, thus making the game's calendar system mostly unnecessary, as it only advances when the player is ready. The request system definitely adds content for the player to take part in, while granting pretty impressive rewards including one-of-a-kind weapons, but the requests themselves are usually fetch quests, including gathering junk items dropped by fallen enemies in the most previous dungeon, or conquering past bosses and secret enemies. Technically, Strikers is as stylish a Persona game as ever, though some of the textures and overall coloring seem a lot flatter in this iteration. The controllable camera can prove detrimental in smaller areas, or when the number of enemies is so great, it's hard to determine what direction a character is being hit from or recognizing an enemy's telegraphed attack before it's too late. Loading times can also be a bit of a drag on non-SSD consoles, so Nintendo Switch owners will be waiting anywhere from 5 to 15 seconds in regards to stage and cutscene transitions. One of the most impressive things about Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royale is its soundtrack, a tradition that continues in Strikers. Beyond the remixed versions of 5's biggest hits are the impressive themes heard when moving throughout each dungeon. Sadly, there is a sound issue that pops up a lot during battles, including those with bosses, where the characters are having conversations that are way too low to hear over the concussive fight happening on screen. What should be emotional or informative moments adding to the war is lost because of poor audio mixing and planning. With the English voice cast returning, Strikers has a wonderful English dub that makes this one of the few Japanese crafted experiences that's just as fun listening to the original cast as hearing their English counterparts. Strikers tries to mix the best of both gaming worlds by having the frenetic gameplay of a Musou experience while trying to present a gripping tale only a Persona game could produce, mostly succeeding in the process by gifting fans of Persona 5 a successor worthy of the name with a more bombastic combat system. Unlike Persona 5 Royal that only added to what made the original iteration so much fun, Strikers is a grand departure that may turn off some traditionalists or non-Musou gamers. For Persona 5 lovers who care deeply about the many smaller systems that made up the overall experience, including the Confidant system and the various side activities to increase Joker's social stats, will find this game incredibly underwhelming even if the combat is more exhilarating. Musou gamers who may not care for RPGs or Persona games in general will definitely find something to love here, even if that means missing out on little things in regards to character interactions. Gamers who both enjoy Dynasty Warriors experiences and Persona 5 will happily dump dozens upon dozens of hours into Strikers before and after the credits roll. It may not be the best Musou or Persona game available, but it's hard to deny how well it will steal your heart if you give it the chance.